Representative Manchester.
I'd like to now call on Frieda Miller, representing Community Midwives of Ohio. Good morning, Frieda. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. I'm not used to rooms like this, so please forgive me if I don't do everything correct. But Chairwoman Manchester, Vice Chair Cutrona, Ranking Member Denson, and members of the Families, Aging, and Human Services Committee, thank you for giving me a chance to testify. My name is Frieda Miller. I am a practicing CPM from Holmes County, the largest Amish community in this state. I have been a midwife for 37 years, and I have received over 4,000 babies into this world. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give testimony on HB496 and the substitute bill that has just been brought forth. As the current president of the Community Midwives of Ohio, I will be speaking on their behalf today. Community Midwives of Ohio is a 501c6 midwifery-led organization that has been formed to advocate for the protection of practicing rights of all midwives. We strive to provide member midwives with information and action opportunities to keep midwifery alive and well in Ohio. Our organization represents over half of Ohio's current practicing midwives. Our goal is to uphold and protect our state's current support of autonomous practices of diverse types of midwives. We recognize that there are different routes to becoming a midwife, including the apprenticeship model, as well as different types of midwives. Direct entry midwife is an umbrella term that encompasses all types of non-nurse midwives, including certified midwives, certified professional midwives, certified international midwives, and traditional or community midwives. We long to see the tradition and art of midwifery retained for future generations. We oppose 496 and the substitute bill as currently written. I have an exhibit that I think you should have received, Exhibit A. House Bill 496 has many merits in its attempts to license CMs and CPMs in Ohio. We would like to see licensing be available for the midwives that feel they would be better able to serve well with it. However, there are also many problematic portions to the bill which, unless amended, will greatly affect the work of many midwives, including a number who have been successfully serving families in Ohio for over 3 decades, some for over 4. As Representative Kaler said in his introduction, and I quote, "There is no problem with midwives in our state. Nothing currently needs to be fixed with midwifery in Ohio. To our best count, there are approximately 75 practicing direct entry midwives in Ohio, and that number increases yearly. We have not been able to locate any certified midwives in this state. We are here to request that House Bill 496 be amended in ways that will increase protection in this state for all types of midwives, both licensed and unlicensed. Currently, midwifery in Ohio is not illegal. There are no laws prohibiting the practice of direct entry midwives in our state. House Bill 496 or its substitute bill, if passed as written, will criminalize unlicensed midwives as a 4th or 5th degree felony. How can this be in the best interest of childbearing women and families in our state? There are thousands of families all over the state who value highly the services of unlicensed midwives. You have received letters from a small fraction of them. Poor fetal maternal outcome rates in Ohio is cited as a reason to introduce this bill. How will requiring all midwives to be licensed improve maternal and fetal outcomes? Remember that Representative Kaler says midwives are already doing a good job, and they are unlicensed. Requiring licensure will not increase the number of midwives in our state, it will greatly decrease it. Will this improve outcomes? Following are 3 suggestions to improve House Bill 496. First, add or change language to eliminate criminal charges for providing simple midwifery care. It is well documented that the midwifery model of care, and Exhibit B or C has been given to you. The midwifery model of care is safe and satisfying to the majority of women. Please uphold the work of midwives instead of instituting laws that would hinder the practices we have had for decades. Second, please do not place the Ohio Board of Nursing as the regulatory body over non-nurse midwives. In general, midwives are not nurses. We do not practice medicine, but rather have devoted our lives to the care of pregnant women using the midwifery model of care. This is not the same paradigm as obstetrical care or certified nurse midwifery care. We suggest that any regulation to our profession be overseen by the Board of Health, the Board of Job and Family Services, or another board more appropriate to our profession. Other states have shown that there are boards better suited to oversee the regulation of midwives than the Board of Nursing, and there's an exhibit for that you've been given also. Thirdly, exemptions need to be more solid. The exemptions put forth in Section 4723.54B of HB496 and Section 4723.54B2 F and G of the substitute bill do not go far enough to protect all midwives and the families desiring their services. As well, according to our legal advice, these exemptions are extremely fragile to the bill and are at high risk of being changed or removed with time. It is our understanding that a non-severability clause needs to be added to this bill and its substitute bill to more solidly protect these exemptions. We ask that the bill be amended in such a manner. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. I will try to answer questions as honestly as I can to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Representative Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you so much, Frieda, for coming. And I just want to make one statement before I ask my question. It is so lovely to see all the little faces in the house. I was walking through the halls and saw all of the little ones here, and I just have to say that's wonderful. It's the people's house, and I know it brings joy to all of us to see them coming through the halls. So thank you for bringing your children. It's a pleasure to see them. It always makes my day, and I know it does for all of us. You bring up a very interesting point here, and I like the fact that you're not against any regulation. You've laid out beautifully what you would like to see, and really a midwife, it takes a very special person, I think, to be a midwife. It's more of a calling, isn't it?
It's a 24-hour-a-day, 365 days a year calling.
Well, I always think of it as really, it is, I'm sure it is. And I would think that a midwife really looks into prenatal care. You probably promote prenatal care a great deal. I can tell by your face that is something that you talk up and talk to the people that you have taken care of. I don't know why, but you just have a very kind look about you, an aura, if you will. I find that your exemptions are interesting, and really you're somewhere in between a nurse and an OBGYN, aren't you?
Okay, excuse me, I'm not sure exactly how I'm supposed to answer this.
Well,
Representative Manchester,
I'm trying to, yeah,
Representative
you can, however you want to answer,
Okay.
really.
All questions and answers can be directed through the chair.
Through the chair
Thank you.
to the representative.
Okay, I'm not really a nurse.
Right. But
I'm not really an OB.
somewhere in between there, correct?
I guess a midwife is neither of those, but she's in between. I guess you could say that.
Okay, so it makes sense to me that you would be not under the nursing care, but under the Board of Health. That would make sense to me. I think that's a very valid point, so thank you for that. That was really my question. I think that makes perfect sense. I think all of your points were very valid, so thank you.
Thank you.
Representative John?
Thank you, Chair Manchester. Thank you, Ms. Miller, for being here today and testifying. So I have actually a couple of questions, but my first question is the same question that I had for the previous witness, and that is, I take it from your testimony that you think the bill goes too far in regulating midwifery.
Yes.
Okay, so just to point out the difference in the interested parties are extreme. Follow-up? Thank you. So you stated in your testimony that you do not practice medicine, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so legally, in order to give a prescription drug, according to the laws in the state of Ohio, they have to be prescribed by someone who is practicing medicine. They're complicated laws. So if you are not practicing medicine, are you in agreement that it's illegal for a midwife to prescribe drugs?
Yes.
And so is that something in your 37 years? Have you ever given prescription drugs to a patient?
I can't say that I never have, but certainly not recently.
Okay. So just clarification though, that is a law that prescription drugs must be prescribed by a medical profession, and that should not be happening in the midwifery according to the laws, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Grandel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for your very articulate testimony. It was very thorough and very well done, if this is your first time. It was brought up several times that somebody who's at low risk could change into be high risk and to have preeclampsia, have high blood hypertension, have several things. Tell me what a midwife, your profession, would do if something happened that was critical, bad breaches. How do you handle that? And how can you, if you don't want this, a lot of the parts of this bill, if you don't want that, how would you protect the child and the mother in that situation? Thank you.
If a mother has preeclampsia, which includes high blood pressure, if she truly has that, sometimes there are signs that that is happening, and we can alter maybe the diet and exercise and things like that, and it will get better. But if it doesn't get better, they get their care transferred to medical people.
Follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you. What about, right at the moment of birth and there's a very critical situation? How would that differ from a hospital versus a midwife in the home? What would happen? Thank you.
Okay. Representative Grandel through Representative Manchester. There are certain critical situations that can just quickly be taken care of. Are you thinking of anything in specific?
No, I'm not. I'm trying to find out and to assure people that midwife would handle a critical situation and how they would do that.
There are a lot of critical situations that can be handled with wisdom and quick action on the part of the mother and the midwife. Position changes. A lot of people are afraid of cords around the neck. Those are not usually that hard to take off. But what we do during the labor that helps us to know that that things with baby and mom are okay is check their vitals. Does the baby sound fine? Is the mother doing well? Are her vitals still good? Is she holding up well? And if she is not, transfer to the hospital.
Vice Chair Catrona?
Thank you. Thank you. Through the chair to the witness. Based kind of off of Representative Grindel's question, there was talk about this transferring to the hospital. Can you tell the committee here what is the average percentage of transfers that actually go to the hospitals? Basically, out of all the mothers, how many times do you guys have to transfer them to the hospital?
Representative Catrona through Representative Chair. My transport rate is approximately 4.5%. So most potential transfers can be detected prenatally, like, oh, you're having this problem. I think you need to be transferred to another caretaker.
Follow up?
Yeah, one follow-up. So basically, we're not dealing with 60% of the, or 75% rushing them to the hospital in a fast-paced hurry. So is that fair then? You guys have a 4%, 2%, somewhere in that ballpark?
Right. And some of the hospital transfers, a lot of them actually are not rushed to the hospital, but we're not making progress here. We need some help. Let's go in. Go in with your car. It's not an emergency. That's the way a lot of the transfers actually are.
Thank you.
Are there any additional questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time today. And the additional information that she mentioned in her testimony is included on your iPad, so I would just ask members to refer to that information
Thank
there.
you.
I'd like to now invite Pamela Kolanz of the Community Midwives of Ohio. Good morning and welcome to committee.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I shouldn't say me, us. There's a whole lot of us's here, aren't there? Representative Manchester, Vice Chairman Representative Catrona, Ranking Member Representative Denson, and all the distinguished members that are getting less in front of me, apparently, of this committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. My name is Pamela Kolanz, and I am a traditional community midwife serving home birthing families, both Amish, plain, and mainstream families in Northeast Ohio for almost 30 years now. As well, I'm a midwife at the Middlefield Care Center. This is an Amish exempt birth center in Middlefield, Ohio. Professionally, I serve on the board of directors of the Community Midwives of Ohio, and I'm a longstanding officer of the Ohio Midwives Alliance. I also remain a 30-year chapter leader of the International Cesarean Awareness Network of Greater Cleveland. I affirm to you that my calling to midwifery and the families that I have the privilege of serving is deeply rooted in my heart, along with the almost 4,000 babies that my hands have been blessed to welcome. I am in opposition of House Bill 496 and the proposed substitute bill as it is currently written. Quite simply, House Bill 496 and the proposed substitute bill decreases parental birth choices in this state. It eliminates the valuable unlicensed midwife along with the freedoms both that she and them exercise to accomplish the safe and satisfying births for both mothers and babies that we are well known to help with. A little bit of a history lesson, please. Midwifery is as old as time. Women birthing in the safety and comfort of their own homes before World War II was quite common. And in fact, both of my parents and my in-laws were born at home. I have also birthed at home. Women in that time, back to World War II, they were attended at home by unlicensed midwives as they are today. Shamefully, the work of midwives came under the attack post-World War II in our country as hospitals and professions established themselves and marketed their care. To get the public to choose to hospital birth, an active false campaign against midwives was successfully undertaken. The misrepresentation of midwifery care was especially strong in the southern states. Laws were passed on paper that made it seem as if the midwives were given a continued path to practice the art of midwifery. In reality, however, those laws restricted and eliminated important midwifery care, which some states are still struggling to overcome today. That helps. The resurgence of home birth and unlicensed midwifery care occurred in the 1960s due to the major dissatisfaction with maternal and infant care in hospitals. I stand before you to engage your help to not, please, repeat the sins of the past against midwives and against childbearing families. If this bill is passed, I will become a criminal. Although I am not now, it is estimated that over half of the approximate 75 to 100 unlicensed midwives currently practicing in Ohio will also enter criminal status along with me. Earlier this week, each member of this committee received a sampling packet of over 200 letters from the Amish, plain, and mainstream public. If you did not get that packet, I do have extras right here, and I would be happy to make sure that you get that. Due to the time of day of this hearing, it would be a huge travel and financial hardship for most of those working families to appear here today, especially on short notice. Families all over Ohio want you to fully understand the impact you will have in the private bedrooms of birthing women in our state. I implore you, if you haven't already, please read those letters. Hear their truth, and further understand the bigger repercussions that House Bill 496 and the substitute bill will have on their very real families. It is a very different reality for them than it appears on the legislative paper of this bill. Understands that families choose to home birth largely because they want to be outside a regulated system, and they want to make choices regarding their care that are best for them and not mandated by medicalized care. Direct entry midwives, our holistic training is to oversee and support wellness in a pregnant woman. Assistance with birth in the postpartum period is unlike the medical model of obstetrics, nursing, or even nurse midwifery care. Regulating and licensing traditional community midwifery care under a medical board, such as the Board of Nursing, is risky to my profession and the families we serve. And we've been down this road before here in the Ohio legislature. Years ago, another bill sought to criminalize non-nurse midwives, and the Direct Entry Midwifery Study Council was created. It met for over a year to see what, if any, regulation was needed in the practices of unlicensed midwives. Each of you received a copy of that report via electronic transmission months ago, and again this week. I hope you have read it or will read it. There were so many hours, so much testimony, and tax dollars that were spent looking very closely at my profession. The Study Council's majority recommendations were to, number one, to legislatively decriminalize the unlicensed practice of midwifery. Number two, they recommended to utilize a process of informed consent, which midwives do today anyhow. Number three, that council recommended to register. They recommended registration, but not licensure of practicing direct entry midwives. And fourth, they recommended the advancement of public information regarding home birth and direct entry midwives. Yet here we are, years later, some of us second time around, right? We have House Bill 496 before it, and now it's a substitute bill, ignoring all of those important recommendations. It would seem to me that your committee has a great opportunity here and now to do something very worthwhile by directing sponsoring legislators to come forth with a bill to reflect the recommendation of that study council rather than this elaborate government overstep called House Bill 496. Representative Taylor testified that there is no problem with midwifery in our state, and that was a quote. Yet this bill's goal is to completely change what has been working so well for so many decades. What's that saying? If it ain't broken, don't try to fix it because you will surely break it. You are asked to amend or reject this bill because it criminalizes the unlicensed midwife. Families in Ohio need their continued outstanding care and low maternal and infant mortality rates. Eliminating one type of midwife to uphold another does not make sense, nor does it best serve safe childbearing for families. You are asked to amend or reject this bill because it will regulate non-nurse midwives under the Board of Nursing. Non-nurse midwives cannot effectively or fairly be regulated by a medical board which has historically been opposed to non-nurse midwives and has totally different training and philosophies regarding childbirth. The Ohio Department of Health has been working successfully with non-nurse midwives for many years and continues to be the best board to expand non-nurse midwifery care options in Ohio. You're asked to amend or reject this bill with its discriminatory religious exemptions because it doesn't include, first of all, a non-severability clause protecting those exemptions. All people in Ohio should be able to avail themselves to non-nurse midwifery care, regardless of whether they or their chosen midwife are considered religious. Midwives must legally be able to assist both religious and non-religious families alike. And finally, you're asked to amend or reject this bill because it does not uphold the important recommendations of the Direct Entry Midwifery Study Council of the Ohio Legislature. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I might be able to.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time
Thank
today.
you all.
Good morning, Monica. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Chairwoman Manchester, Vice Chair Catrona, Ranking Member Denson, and all members of the Families, Aging, and Human Services Committee, my name is Monica Honeycutt, and I thank you all for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm a direct entry, or sometimes referred to as traditional midwife, practicing in Northeast Ohio since 2016. I've caught nearly 400 babies now, not 4,000 like some of these other ladies. I attend births both in clients' homes and at the Middlefield Care Center, which is an exempt Amish birthing center in Geauga County. I serve a wide variety of clients, some from the Plain communities, others not. I am on the board of directors of Community Midwives of Ohio and am an officer of the Ohio Midwives Alliance. My interest in midwifery began when I was expecting my second child. I was looking for a different level of care than I had been offered with my first, which was the standard obstetric care. I wanted to make my own choices for myself and my baby. I wanted to know who would be helping me birth my baby. I wanted to work with someone I felt I could really trust and who in return trusted me to make appropriate decisions. I wanted to feel safe and supported through what I viewed as a normal physiological process. I found all of these things. I found them with an unlicensed midwife. My midwife spent more time with me in our first visit than I had spent with my previous obstetrician throughout my entire pregnancy. That's not an exaggeration, it's math. By the time my son was born, I knew her very well, and she knew me. We had built the kind of relationship that creates the safest and most comfortable circumstances for birth. My home births were wonderful. I am so grateful for those experiences, and they were my motivation to become a midwife myself. I believe that I am called to this work of helping women and babies have safe, peaceful, respectful, and minimally interventive births. The arrival of a new baby is a sacred event and should be honored as such. The long-term benefits of midwifery care for both mothers and babies are too many to list here today, but cannot be overstated. I believe this is a point on which most of us on all sides of this issue can agree. As Representative Kaler has stated, the midwives providing care in Ohio are not causing problems. They do not need to be fixed, end quote, which is why I am opposed to House Bill 496 as it is currently written. I have read and studied the substitute bill as well. While this legislation may have been created with good intentions, as it is written, my concern is that it will cause more harm than good. Of the midwives in Ohio who are currently practicing, about half of them do not meet qualifications for licensure set forth in HB 496. This will quite obviously reduce access when the stated goal is to do just the opposite. In Representative Kaler's introduction of this bill, he made the following statement: "We want midwifery to flourish. That is the intention of this bill." It will become exponentially more difficult, if not impossible, for midwifery to flourish in Ohio if half of us are transformed overnight into felons. A large number of our senior midwives, those with decades of experience, will not qualify for this licensure currently. They are highly unlikely to jump through all of the regulatory hoops to continue practicing. If we lose them as active midwives, we also lose the wisdom and knowledge that they would pass along to future midwives. This bill, as written, will essentially kill traditional midwifery, while pulling licensed midwives into a flawed system that, quite frankly, many women are deliberately choosing to avoid. Licensed midwives are beholden to the board that regulates them, in this case, the Board of Nursing. When birth choices are taken out of the hands of birthing families and placed in the hands of a regulatory board, some freedom is necessarily lost. This becomes particularly problematic when those being regulated have entirely different backgrounds and training than those doing the regulating. Most unlicensed midwives are not nurses, and most nurses are not midwives. Therefore, it is quite illogical for one to create rules and regulations applying to the other. Traditional midwives and CPMs, not nurses, are the experts in out-of-hospital birth. They are extensively trained to recognize when pregnancy, birth, or postpartum has become higher risk. They know how and when to facilitate transfer to an appropriate location and/or care provider in those situations. This constant assessment of well-being and recognition of warning signs is what allows out-of-hospital providers to maintain high levels of safety. This next part will answer some of your questions about transfer rates and statistics and things. I would like to share with you some statistics that challenge the notion that birth would be safer with licensed midwives. New Bedford Care Center is located in Fresno and is one of Ohio's freestanding exempt birth centers. There are no nurses, nurse midwives, or doctors working there. All births are attended by unlicensed midwives. Some are CPMs, certified professional midwives, and others are direct entry or traditional midwives. As of a few days ago, 2,062 babies have been born at New Bedford Care Center. They have had one maternal death due to amniotic fluid embolism, which is a very rare and unpredictable and difficult to treat event regardless of where it takes place. They have had 0 fetal deaths, 0 births induced or augmented with pharmaceuticals, 0 IVs needed. Their transfer rate is 11%, and their cesarean rate is 1%. Now, keeping in mind that this is an exempt birth center, so there are rules for transfer that might not otherwise apply to those of us that practice in homes. They have to transfer if it's past a certain date or if the baby is in a certain position, things like that. So most of those transfers are not urgent transfers. The last statistic is they have a cesarean rate of 1%. I almost missed that. 1% cesarean rate. This last statistic is particularly noteworthy given the fact that the overall cesarean rate in Ohio is greater than 31%. Obviously, avoiding so many major abdominal surgeries also avoids the complications that often result from such procedures. Again, to echo Representative Kaler, midwives in Ohio are doing a great job, and they are doing so as unlicensed midwives. I do understand that some midwives would prefer to be licensed. I'm not opposed to licensure for those who want it. However, this bill needs to include an exemption for traditional midwives that would allow them to continue to serve all women, not only those who qualify as religious by some ambiguous standard. In my view, HB496 is a solution looking for a problem. I urge you all to consider the repercussions this bill will have for many families in Ohio if it is enacted as written. I ask you to reject House Bill 496 and any other bill that will result in loss of birth freedoms now and in the future. Restricting access to traditional midwives is not the way to expand midwifery care in Ohio. I ask all of you to please do your part to help preserve the timeless art that is midwifery. Thank you for the opportunity to share my concerns with this legislation, and I will be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Representative Catrona?
Through the chair to the witness. So typically when there's licenses, it's there for a safety factor, typically. So let me ask you this question. I'm looking at some of these stats here, and is there any statistical data that there's an increase in mortality rate for an unlicensed versus a licensed?
Through the chair to the representative, not that I'm aware of. No, I mean, in Ohio, as far as the folks that I know personally, the mortality rate, infant and maternal mortality rate amongst unlicensed midwives is almost non-existent. It is very, very low, and that is mostly because we transfer when appropriate. And we do that, we're not mandated to do that, but we do that because we do this for the love of women and babies, and we don't want to put them in any harm's way either. So if there is a need, then we move them where they can get the help that they need. Those urgent situations that happen at the moment of delivery that you can't predict, we're trained to deal with. And many times we're dealing with it the same way they would deal with it in the hospital. You know, maneuvers and things like that, that we are trained in as well. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, just real quick, just a quick synopsis on that. So unlicensed versus licensed, there's basically no difference on any mortality rate that's tied to delivery.
As far as I'm aware, I mean, we don't have any licensed midwives in Ohio currently, so I can't compare them in this state, but looking at other states, I've never seen any data that suggests that licensing reduces mortality.
Representative John?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for being here. So the statistics that you presented, you said that, I think your transfer rate is 11%? Is that correct?
Through the chair to the representative, they're not actually my statistics, those are New Bedford Care Center's statistics, which is not the care center that I work at. The care center I work at also has physicians working there, so it's with separate practices, so it muddies the waters with numbers and things. So the person who wanted to be here to present that works at that care center, and she had a death in the family and couldn't make it, so I'm presenting her statistics. But yes, 11% is her transfer rate.
Okay.
Not just hers, but all of the midwives that work in that center.
Follow up?
Thank you. So the other statistics that you gave as far as the 1% C-sections, does that include the outcomes of the 11% that were transferred?
That's total. Of the 100% of people who start at the care center, 1% of them end up in cesarean. So 11% transfer for some reason, only 1% transfer. So I guess maybe 10% of that 11%, if we do the math, actually end up with something like that, with a surgical procedure. Most transfers, as Frieda mentioned, most transfers are long labor, things aren't progressing, we decide to go, we need IV fluids, we do something that's just, somebody decides they want an epidural, whatever it is, it's not urgent. The urgent transfers are well less than 1% of our transfers.
Are there any additional questions for the witness? See none. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Good morning, Sarah. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Chairwoman Manchester, Vice Chair Catrona, Ranking Member Denson, and all members of the Families, Aging, and Human Service Committee. I'm Sarah Weaver. Growing up in Georgia, I vividly remember my mother having 7 unassisted home births due to the fact that she was not able to find a midwife. She had 2 hospital births, which were very bad outcomes. They were either non-existent, midwives were either non-existent or underground, which drives me to plead for proper changes in HB496. I want to thank Representative Kaler for recognizing midwives. After reading and studying the bill and the new substitute bill, I oppose HB496 for the reasons I want to address. I have to wonder whether Representative Kaler and the committee here at large understand how many different midwives there are. Most people in the state of Ohio hear midwife and they think that it's a CNM, the N for nurse, certified nurse midwife. To be a CNM, the individual must already be an RN registered nurse. And then they want to specialize in delivering babies, so they go on to midwife school and become certified nurse midwives, CNM. The laws of Ohio have been established for CNMs for a number of years already. Certified midwives, CM, are graduated from the same certified school as the nurse midwives, except they are not nurses. Currently, there are no known CMs in the state of Ohio. Current Ohio law does not forbid or restrict or criminalize midwives in general. Let us look at some other types of midwives. Direct entry midwives, also known as DEM, also known as traditional midwives, which I am one of those, who have been primarily trained by apprenticeship. There are approximately 75 to 100 direct entry traditional midwives in Ohio. But there are 2 different kinds of direct entry traditional midwives. There are those who feel the need to get a more professional title and go through the process of getting certified through the North American Registry of Midwives, who then can hold the title of Certified Professional Midwife CPM, P for professional. North American Registry of Midwives, also known as NARM, was formed in 1992 as a way for midwives to register as a group among themselves. 2/3 of those were direct entry traditional midwives, and 1/3 of those were nurse midwives. They then created a testing system to allow for certification, creating certified professional midwives, CPM, the P for professional. Most CPMs were direct entry midwives. A side note about the North American Registry of Midwives, also known as NARM, is that there is a group of those same midwives who have put into place what they call the Big Push. Their goal is to make it legal for CPMs in every state, which sounds very noble and good. But they are doing so under the disguise of making midwifery legal, but making other midwives illegal. Unfortunately, they are willing to do this by making the sister midwives, those direct entry traditional midwives, who are not willing to join their ranks of becoming a CPM and pay their dues of money, illegal. A lot of CPMs will tell you that they really don't practice any different being a CPM versus when they were just a direct entry traditional midwife. Unfortunately, this bill only addresses CPMs and CMs, also making it a higher barrier to entry for CPMs. It does not address direct entry traditional midwives. Instead, these midwives, direct entry traditional midwives, who make up approximately half of the 75 to 100 midwives that this bill and substitute bill will affect, will be put out of business and no longer able to serve the women they are currently serving. The charge of a felony on page 98 in the current substitute bill in section 4723.99 should be removed and replaced as a misdemeanor in section 4723.99B. Doing this would at least keep the families of these midwives partly safe and keep those midwives from becoming a felon. Another area that needs to be changed to help protect those direct entry traditional midwives who have already been doing a good job for decades. And here I would like to quote Representative Kaler's opening comment: "The midwives providing care in Ohio are not causing a problem. They do not need to be fixed." If he really believes this, then he should have no problem in reinstating this into the bill and protecting those direct entry traditional midwives. So on page 76 in the current substitute bill in section 4723.54B2G, this wording should be changed to read as follows. G, a person who provides midwifery services without a license, giving them written informed consent, stating they are not licensed to use prescription drugs and that their education and qualifications have not been reviewed by any board. If these 2 points were changed, I personally would no longer be in opposition against House Bill 496. It is my greatest concern that allowing this bill to pass as it is currently written and substituted would largely affect the families in Ohio who use their services, and we have valuable midwives in the state that would then be charged as a felony and bring more expenses to our state's revenue. This is a terrible bad management and oversight in the part of regulations on our state. I plead with you to make these changes to protect something that Representative Kaler has already said does not need to be fixed. Thank you for hearing my concerns. I'm open to any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time today. I'd like to now call on Melinda McCoy to present testimony. Good morning and welcome to committee.
Good morning. I am just breezing in after catching a new little baby this morning, so forgive me if I can't see straight. So, Chairman Manchester, Vice Chair Catrona, Ranking Member Denson, and all members of the Families, Aging, and Human Services Committee, my name is Melinda McCoy. I'm a midwife serving the southwest corner of Ohio, Dayton, Cincinnati, spanning at least 12 counties for the past 18 years. I also attended births as a labor support years before becoming a midwife. I gave birth to all 3 of my girls at home with midwives 30-some years ago. I hold the credential as a certified international midwife. a global credential that meets rigorous international standards for out-of-hospital birth. This credential requires a complex board examination, extensive continuing education, peer review, and regular renewals. In 2020, I was asked to serve as the executive director for the International Registry of Midwives, which is what holds that credential, the CIM, a position I hold even up to now. I'm on the board of Community Midwives of Ohio and New Life Global Missions, a global maternity care nonprofit organization, and I'm also a member of Ohio Midwives Alliance. Although I'm not opposed to some form of licensure for CPMs if they choose to become licensed, I would also like licensure opportunities expanded to include other midwifery credentials, such as the CIM, that are equivalent to or more advanced than the CPM. And there's language in that in this substitute bill. So that's what I'm addressing right now. I see the language has been added to the bill that allows for licensure eligibility for other credentials beyond the MEEC CPM or the CPM with a bridge certificate. The problem with this statement that as written in the substitute bill is that no credential exists that is accredited by the ICM, which is the International Confederation of Midwives, and approved by U.S. MERA, and all that's in the substitute bill. They are both membership associations. Neither organization approves or accredits. NARM, MEEC, NACPM, the ACNM, amongst others, are all members of both. None of these organizations accredit or approve by the International Confederation of Midwives, the ICM, or the U.S. Midwifery Education Regulation and Association, which is the U.S. MERA. They are membership associations. My suggestion is that the alternative credential to the MEEC CPM or the CPM with bridge certificate would need to be accredited by an independent third-party credential accrediting authority that is legally recognized. And this is how NARM, that exam, that CPM exam, is accredited through a third-party accreditation authority. It's already happening. There are many valid credential accreditation authorities throughout the world that would ensure an alternative credential is equivalent or superior to the CPM. Because ICM and US MERA don't offer these accreditations and approvals, simply memberships, the bill language as it stands in the substitute bill is extremely limiting. It's completely inaccurate in this area and confusing. Okay, I'd like to switch gears. I have personally worked with Indigenous midwives, nurse midwives, traditional midwives, and CPMs here in the States and various countries around the world, hence the reason I'm interested in the international midwifery. I'm unwilling to sacrifice the loss of one kind of midwife just to uphold another type of midwife here in Ohio. Midwifery is an ancient wisdom practice and honors a physiologic and biological process. Midwives have been serving families unlicensed and safely in Ohio as long as we've been a state and long before that. HB496 will not increase the availability of midwives and in fact will decrease the number of legally available midwives for out-of-hospital births. We have counties in this state, such as Medina, Ashtabula, Portage, that no longer have labor and delivery hospitals due to buyouts, closures of those community-based labor and delivery units. Families are having to drive nearly an hour to a hospital. We have many community midwives successfully serving these maternity deserts, and these communities will be dangerously impacted by their loss. The March of Dimes reports that 36% of counties in the U.S. are suffering from maternity care deserts, and those numbers are growing. Maternity care deserts mean they have no obstetric hospitals or birth centers. These counties usually have several hospitals, but none offering maternity, labor, delivery care. Again, as Representative Kaler has stated, there is no problem with midwives in Ohio. We are actively serving areas that would be considered maternity deserts and increasing safety for Ohio families who choose out-of-hospital births. When families live in a maternity desert and are unable or unwilling to drive 2 hours round trip for maternity care, they will often choose home birth care with community midwives. Lack of access to skilled prenatal, labor, birth, and postpartum care will significantly increase mortality and morbidity rates in Ohio. HB496 does not address, nor will it fix, the poor infant and maternal mortality rates found in hospitals. Every midwife I know deeply cares about this issue, but mandating licensure of midwives and criminalizing some does not correct this very sad issue. Midwives providing out-of-hospital births in Ohio have extremely low infant and maternal mortality rates. The Ohio Department of Health that has all that information collected, cataloged, via birth certificate paperwork, which we file for all midwifery clients. In Ohio 2020, the infant mortality rate was 6.7 per 1,000 births for all races. The mortality rate for Black infants was 13.6 in 2020. The Ohio and the Healthy People 2030 goal is 5.0 or fewer infant deaths per 1,000 live births in every racial and ethnic group. Racial and socioeconomic inequalities persist. Black infants die at a rate almost 3 times higher than white infants. The fact is, the United States is one of the most dangerous places to give birth in the industrialized world. Mortality rates have increased over the last several decades, despite the vast majority of births occurring in a hospital setting with physicians. That's an easy Google to see where we rank. And you can look at our stats through the Department of Health. We don't even come close to this. Community-based Ohio midwives can and do lower mortality rates by providing affordable and readily accessible access to quality maternity care, removing barriers for all races and socioeconomic status right in the client's home. My desire is that we place servanthood above any and all of our politics, that we preserve this time-honored profession in devotion to the families of Ohio. I'm opposed to any legislation that restricts options for families to choose their own midwife. May you, as their governmental representatives, and we as their midwives, put their wants, needs, and desires above our own. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you. Good morning, Nichole. Welcome to committee.
Well, thank you for having me up here. I do apologize. This is my first time ever doing something like this, but I wanted to thank all of you for hearing all of our different perspectives. And I just was here too to support my sister midwives, because there's some too that couldn't be here today, and I wanted it was really important for me to just get here and just to support some of the main issues. And one of the things I will say is that I agree with my sisters in that. I feel like we need the choice. I am Nichole Young, and I work out of Summit County with Vine of Life Midwifery Care. I've been doing this for 28 years, delivered well over 3,000 babies. I've never lost anyone, mom or baby at birth or anything, with all the different situations that I've had to handle. Of course, we've seen some like stillborns, and I've had a few of those that much we can do about, or we tried to do the best we could. But just to give you a little bit of background, but I just really wanted to make the statement about choice. Like, I really do believe there are some midwives, because I'm licensed in South Carolina, I'm licensed in New Mexico, CPM, a NARM preceptor, so I have valued that, and I've thought about, moving to those different locations and opening up a birth center in those locations. So for me, I would be fine with being licensed, but what I wouldn't be fine with is that mothers could not have the choice as our constitutional right of freedom, of medical freedoms. I feel like the mother should have the choice of where she would like to birth. If that's with somebody licensed, then that's who she's most comfortable with. She should be able to be with that person. If she wants to be with a traditional midwife, and that's where she feels the safest and has her views, then she should be able to choose who she wants and where she wants to deliver her baby, where she feels safe and who she feels connected to. So I feel like midwives are like amazing. Like, I've worked with Frieda Miller was my preceptor. I trained at the Amish country for like 21 years. I learned so much off of her. And for many years, she was a traditional midwife. And we honor each other, whether we're traditional midwives or CPMs. We back each other up. We're there for each other. We're sisters. And, we're skilled, and we kind of self-regulate, where if somebody seems to be getting out on the outskirts or maybe jumped into midwifery a little too quick, a lot of times, we'll set them aside and say, they help them out, like, let me get you what you need, or, help you get this skill set or whatever, so that, moms and babies are safe, which is our common goal. Everybody in this room is a safe mom and baby. So the other thing is that I feel like the nursing board is really not, like in the states where I'm licensed in New Mexico and South Carolina, we aren't under a nursing board. We're under the Ohio Department of Health, and there's a midwifery advisory board. And I actually had to go through my test and sit down with all of them, and it included an OB that was really familiar with midwives and how midwives function. So he really had a good idea and handle on how we perform our art and practice. And there was a CNM, and there were 2 CPMs on that advisory board, and they were fantastic. And I feel like in the states where they do a lot of home births or birth center births with CPMs, and there's licensing, that's the standard. That's the same in New Mexico and South Carolina, and it kind of works there. Now, I think what we're concerned about is what doctors see as being the high-risk patient. Because a lot of things they would consider high-risk patients, we don't think is high risk. And I think that's where it differs on skill levels and sets. Like, for instance, in some states or some physicians or nurses, they would think that VBACs, that's a dangerous thing. You shouldn't be able to have a VBAC at home. And I'm speaking for my sister midwife, Arva, that is not here today, who it ended up being illegal for her to, because it's automatic C-section most of the times, depending on the doctor. You got to find a special doctor that will allow you to even try to have a vaginal birth. So it's very hard to try to find somebody who will let you do that. So she was living in a state where it was illegal for midwives to deliver, and she had to do her VBAC alone with no healthcare provider, all by herself. So that's what motivated her into becoming a midwife, so that she could attend those moms so they didn't have to be by themselves. And she became very passionate about this, and that's what we don't want to see. Because if people are forced to go one way or the other, they're going to be forced to deliver their babies, and it's already happening by themselves. Either if they can't afford the care, they're actually just free birthing, they call it, where they don't have to pay for their services, so they just birth at home by themselves, or, which is fine if that's what they want to do, but I mean, if somebody has got a little bit of a risk and they're birthing by themselves when they could have a skilled midwife, and, you know, maybe the skilled person is not licensed, that's best for her, I feel like it could damage what we have going on out here, because we're all very careful. We have very great rates as far as death and mortality rates. In Netherlands, where midwives do primarily all of their care, they have the top infant and maternity rates, death rates of any country. And their primary source is midwives, and home birth midwives do a lot of home births, handle all of the birth care. And only the doctors really take over cases like heart conditions and, you know, severe diabetic and all the different types of things that are real medical emergencies. Even blood pressure issues, like we handle it with herbals and magnesium and, you know, hawthorn berries. And I mean, I just handled a mom who over and over they just kept inducing her. She had so much trauma about her blood pressure that the moment she would come into my office, her blood pressure would shoot up, like with white coat syndrome, just because she was so traumatized by the amount of, you know, oh, your blood pressure's up again, you got to go to the hospital, all right, we got to induce you, and she always went overdue, so it was always stressing her out. So she just delivered a few days ago, and she wanted me to, like, let you know that her experience was night and day. We handled everything naturally, we kept her blood pressure down naturally, and if there were stipulations or we were under a nursing board, that wouldn't have happened for her. She would have had to been transported, and if we don't follow protocols, you know what, then I have to go to jail because I'm doing something natural that works and not actually turning him to the hospital to get, you know, magnesium through IV. So I just feel like, you know, it's important for us to hear the mom, because even the trauma, if they've had a traumatic experience in the hospital and their VBAC, and just walking into a hospital gives them PTSD, and then you're forcing them to go to the hospital, not be with the midwife they trust, that emotional issues and PTSD can cause more stress and more complications for that baby than actually just letting them be with the midwife that they're with. And if something goes down, that midwife goes into the hospital with them and advocates for them. And I feel like the main thing we got going on here, we have a shortage of doctors, 125,000 doctors over the next 10 years. There's a shortage. There's a current shortage of nurses, and it's expected to stay that way into the future. Why would we add one more responsibility for nurses and doctors when they have so much to do serving people who really need the medical attention? The other thing is nurses' primary education is dealing with death, you know, injuries, traumas. Very few are like specialized in birth, and like all of their training has been in birth and postpartum care and breastfeeding and all the different things that we have been doing from the very beginning and trained under experienced midwives. So I feel like they're not going to really understand, you know, what our art is. And like palpation, they're not taught that in medical school. They're not taught how to handle breech deliveries. We're taught how to do it. Doctors of old used to be able to do that vaginally. Why should every breech baby have to be cut out? Why? Why should every twin pregnancy have to be cut out if one goes breech? I've never had a problem with my breech and my twins. I've never lost anybody. If you know what you're doing, you can get the babies out. And if there's a situation, it presents itself and you transport and you go in with, you explain the thing you're coming across that you're concerned about, and then you hand them over. And if they need a C-section, that's fine. But I really don't see a lot of emergency transports. I probably do 80 to 100 births a year, and I maybe transport, you know, 3, 4. Sometimes it's a little bit higher in some years. And most of the time, it's just a first-time mom, been a long birth, maybe there's a hand up, maybe baby's persistent posterior, which is back-to-back, and you just need to take them in to get some medication for them to get some rest so that they can wake up, you know, and if maybe they're vomiting, they need some fluids and all of that, so then they just need to get some rest and go in, and I'm still there with them. So the relationship is important.
Thank you very much for your testimony and for being here today. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much
All right,
again.
thank you.
Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. I don't wish to be redundant. I won't be reading my written testimony, which you have. Many of those points have already been made. You have heard it said that midwifery is currently lawful in Ohio, which is a true statement based upon some research we did. Originally, the sponsors of this bill raised the specter that it was unlawful, and then paraded a bunch of midwife proponents here who said, please liberate us. What those folks were unaware of is that they're already liberated under Ohio law. Midwifery was unlawful at one time. That statute was repealed by the legislature in the 80s, and midwifery has been legal since that time. In the original proponent testimony, you heard it said that perhaps it wasn't legal because somebody was once prosecuted during a home birth experience. However, there has only been one prosecution, and that midwife was prosecuted for use of controlled substances under Ohio's drug laws, not for the unauthorized practice of midwifery. So there's not a single recorded case within the state reflecting a prosecution for the unauthorized practice of midwifery. It's simply not a crime. Rather than liberating midwives or legalizing midwifery, this bill felonizes it. I don't know why it's a felony instead of a misdemeanor or a civil fine. It seems like an extreme case of overcriminalization on par with the legislature felonizing, farming or gardening or procreation, eating or breathing itself. This is one of the most basic functions of life, obviously, birth. It predates any government, and so there's a great deal of hubris in attempting to criminalize something that predates government itself, and as all have mostly acknowledged, tends not to be an area where there's currently a crisis. It would have been helpful if the sponsors had called upon LSC to do a legal analysis of the history of the lawfulness or unlawfulness of midwifery in Ohio, but that hasn't been done. In an attempt to ameliorate the effects of the felonization of midwifery under the amendments and the original version of this bill, the amendments add proposed section 4723-601, and I do want to address that because nobody else has done so today. That section potentially has a great deal of importance if it were written appropriately, intertwined with the remainder of the bill, and the bill were ready for prime time. So that bill states sections 4723.53 to 4723.60, and these are the regulations prohibiting unauthorized practice and the exemptions, do not abridge, change, or limit in any way the right of a parent to deliver the parent's baby where, when, how, and with whom the parents choose, regardless of licensure requirements established in those sections. We agree wholeheartedly with that statement. And the natural reading of that text is that any midwife, licensed or not, should be able to get the permission of the parent, the statement of the parent that they're exercising their rights, at which point no license would be required for assisting in that birth. However, the way the bill is written is still poor, and that's not entirely clear. So, for example, proposed 472354B1, which is the section that prohibits the unlawful practice of midwifery and then lays out the exceptions, does not include this as an exception. Instead, it simply says that except as provided in Division B2, no individual shall knowingly practice. So this very important statement in proposed 4723-601 is not intertwined with the remainder of the text. Were this to be an affirmative defense to the unauthorized practice of midwifery, I think we could all go home and be fairly satisfied with the bill mostly as is, even though there is a significant legal barrier, and that is that as written also, this bill violates the Ohio Constitution. It violates the Healthcare Freedom Amendment, which the 1851 Center wrote in 2011 and passed by the voters by a 2/3 majority. Division B of that amendment, this is Section 21 of Article 1 of the Ohio Constitution, states that any new laws, rules, enactments subsequent to 2011 are forbidden if there is a state rule that prohibits the sale of health care or penalizes the sale of health care. The bill, by its own terms, calls natural birth health care. I think that that's a serious debate, whether a normal birth is health care or not. However, the bill itself refers repeatedly to these kinds of births all as health care. So You've heard a lot of disagreement amongst doctors, nurses, midwives today about how the political process here should work. I would submit to you that the voters of Ohio have already made the political choice through our Constitution, our ultimate political document, that no further action should be taken to truncate the healthcare freedoms of parents. And I would also suggest to you that when there is a tie, when the doctors, the nurses, and the midwives and the lawmakers do not agree, that the simplest way to resolve that tie or that impasse is to allow parents to choose. I am one of those parents. I have a 1.5-year-old son who was born at home. I could tell you that the process was exceptionally transparent, and it was very easy to interview multiple midwives. They would take hours just sitting with you at no cost. I will tell you also that the contracts were very clear about transfer issues, about risk factors, about what would happen. I could tell you that the cost was very transparent and also exceptionally affordable. I'll be the one to spill the beans because I've watched all of the testimony so far. Nobody has mentioned dollars. The cost of a midwife, we found, was about $3,000. Cash, payment, that's it. Flat fee. It's not like hiring a lawyer where you're billed on an hourly basis. Thankfully, it was much more wonderful of an experience than that. And it's about $4,000 if you have two midwives, which is a nice option to have, and is what was chosen for my son. The birth was peaceful, no drugs or medication was required whatsoever, and he is perfectly healthy. The process allowed us to be fully informed, much more so than in a hospital birth where you have no idea what the cost is going to be, and you have no idea what the procedures are going to be, particularly as this was in the pandemic era where hospitals were requiring testing for women being rushed in labor at the door. Masking was required even during heavy breathing in the birthing process, and in some hospitals were requiring vaccinations and other sorts of procedures and limitations. So it's very important that this opt-out opportunity exists for folks who do not wish to do that. Finally, a point about the nursing board that hasn't been made yet today, and it is no surprise to me that you just heard somebody from the nurses testify about the importance of forcing expensive insurance mandates on midwives that would break their backs and dramatically increase costs. There is zero chance after those insurance mandates could be passed by the Ohio Nursing Board under this bill that our home birth could cost $3,000 or $4,000. We're probably looking at 3 or 4 times that because all those costs will get passed on to the parents. And that is not surprising because since 1998, the Ohio Board of Nursing has maintained the following in their policy statements on this issue. Quote, "The practice of midwifery by persons other than certified nurse midwives should be prohibited." In other words, this bill farms out and empowers nurses who wish to stamp out midwives over the practice of midwifery by non-nurses. That is exceptionally dangerous. So, what do? How do we fix it? It's very simple. You look at what people want here. There are some midwives. Now, as a parent, I did not want a pharmacological medicalized birth. So most midwives, I can tell you, do not want to engage in a pharmacological medicalized birthing process, which is why they're in the business in the first place. However, there are some midwives who wish to tote around some pharmaceutical drugs that they otherwise may not be able to, or just have them available for emergencies. Well, this is a very simple issue to solve. This does not take the 137 pages that you have before you. This takes basically 1 or 2 sentences that creates a pathway for licensure only for those midwives wishing to use pharmaceutical drugs. You create a licensing process for them and identify the pharmaceutical drugs. Very simple. Leave the midwives who do not wish to use pharmaceutical drugs completely unmolested by the bill. Secondly, accountability functions are fine. The mandatory informed consent, I can tell you it's already done. As a consumer, we were informed fully. And there's already voluntary contractual arrangements, opportunities to interview, and common law liability for negligence when midwives do make mistakes that they could be sued over. So accountability functions already exist, but there's no problem with the mandatory informed consent provision of the bill. Third, if the sponsors of the bill are serious about protecting parental rights to control who assists with the birth of the children, then the language inserted in proposed section 4723-601, which is the right of parents to deliver with whom the parent chooses, should be made an affirmative defense to the newly created crime of the unauthorized practice of midwifery. Fourth, there are some religious exemptions in the bill. However, those exemptions are not self-executing. In other words, we don't know who those exemptions apply to until somebody gets prosecuted, and then they raise that as a defense for the first time. There needs to be a simple process for individuals to claim a religious exemption. The state already does this. It does it for vaccination requirements in public schools now. Parents can simply submit a one-page form as a conscientious objector, and it's a self-executing form where you claim the religious exemption. So that if you're going to have religious exemptions in any bill, you have to do that here too. And then five, finally, because of the vast disagreements here, it's best simply to allow parents to decide. There are lots of different opinions, lots of different choices, faux experts on both sides with competing data. It's best just to let parents who have the greatest stake in the matter sort the issue out and not assume that they are children, because of course they're about to have children. They're not the children of the legislature, they're not the children of the doctors. They're able to make adult decisions because they are adults and they are parents. Happy to take any questions now or subsequent to the hearing.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. Are there any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much.